Welcome to GLOBEWATCH with me, Charles Obundi, 8 from the Hilton here in Yaoundé, Cameroon. 10 days from now, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th President of the United States of America with sweeping international ramifications based on his agenda proposed to the American people during last year's presidential election. That will mark an end to 4 years of the Trump administration, simply qualified by some as practicing a policy of disengagement of the United States around the world. As Biden and Harrison prepare to take office as President and Vice President of the United States of America, what will be the impact of the United States' participation legally to the rest of the world, especially when it comes to international treaties like the Paris Climate Change Deal, like the Iranian nuclear deal, wherein the Trump administration had simply pulled out within the past 4 years? My guest today is one of the rising stars of the American legal system. He was qualified last year by the American Bar Association, one of the oldest in the world, as being one of the rising 40 under age 40 lawyers in the United States of America. Zachee Pouga, welcome to GLOBEWATCH.
Thank you very much for having me, Charles.
You are a member of one of the oldest bar associations in the world, the American Bar Association, plus 200 years old, which has been existing now, and you equally practice in New York, which is host to one of the most powerful and richest bar associations in the world, the New York Bar Association. Can you recount to me the thoughts that ran through your mind when you discovered, when you finally realized that Joe Biden won U.S. elections 2020 at the presidential level?
I have to admit it was a little bit of a delayed thought. It took a lot longer for them to decide who was the winner. But when it was finally announced, I have to say there was some kind of a big relief at the international level to see that Joe Biden will be the president. Because you have to remember, Joe Biden has been in the Senate for a very long time. He has a very big track record of international affairs, and he brings with him international policy that is solid. So having Joe Biden as president when the election was finally decided, it came in as a big good news for people who have big interest in international affairs, and we know what Joe Biden stands for when it comes to international affairs, and we more or less know that the policy and the politics of engagement, of leading the world, of influencing the world through diplomacy are back with Joe Biden.
When you said that there was a sign of relief at the personal level and at the global level, because the day the U.S. election officials finally confirmed Donald Trump, Joe Biden, as the winner of the elections, the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, simply tweeted, "Welcome back, America." What was the meaning of that?
It was a little bit, and I have to say, it wasn't very well received by the Trump administration and the people who follow the current president of the United States, because it was a little bit of a smack in the back, a little bit. But the truth is, it was a sign to say America is back. And that doesn't mean that America was gone. It simply means that America had retreated for a little bit. And the current president, President Trump, was clear that his primary mission was not to engage America in the world. His primary mission was America first. Let's take care of America. Let's take care of our internal policies. Let's take care of our economy. Let's take care of our healthcare and all internal. And looking outwards wasn't.
And possibly he was working on that premise based on the reality on the ground. And because just 3% of Americans are interested in foreign policy.
And that's a fair point. That's a fair point. The truth is, the ordinary American is not that enthused about international affairs, and that is true. But you know from a strategic perspective how important international foreign policy is. So when President Trump talks about America first, he's thinking about America internal. He's thinking about America going at things alone. And very quickly, people understood that wasn't the best way to do things. So the election of Joe Biden was, again, a big sigh of relief in the policy institute, international policy institute, because we know that he will engage America again. He will make sure that America goes at international affairs with allies and not alone. And that's why the mayor, the Paris mayor, and then Angela Merkel, I believe, was the second day, called the new president-elect to congratulate them. And they all felt America will be back, America will engage, America will work alongside its allies to solve global issues.
The White House departed from a number of international arrangements wherein the United States was at the forefront of global leadership. The Iranian nuclear deal of 2015, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and in the middle of the worst health crisis of our generation, the United States government under the Trump administration pulled out from the World Health Organization. How do you qualify such an attitude?
Again, it goes back to the fact that the current president, because you can't have two presidents at a time in the US. So
we are yet to
Trump
reach
still
on
the president.
Afternoon, noon on January 20th.
Exactly.
We are yet to reach that.
So President Trump he has been in private life for a long time. So when he was looking at some of these issues, he thought some deals were not fair. And for him, as a bargaining move, he would pull out of the deal to try to renegotiate a better deal. But then he realized very quickly that international affairs was actually a lot more complicated. I think at some point he said he thought negotiating real estate in Manhattan, where I live, is more difficult than the presidency. But then he realized that the presidency is a lot more difficult than negotiating a real estate deal in Manhattan. So doing a move at pulling out of the Paris deal, pulling out of the Iran deal, pulling out of the World Health Organization, for him that was a bargaining move. But when he made those moves, there was nobody to bargain on the other side, because the other side was discouraged. So he realized quickly that's not how to manage international affairs.
Did the US find itself in a legal limbo in behaving all of that? Because of course, some of these issues are binding. Well, some of them were yet to be passed by the U.S. Congress, which has the final say. For example, the Iranian nuclear deal.
Yeah, and it is a very complicated legal question and legal process that has to be undertaken, because when the Obama administration went in and struck the Iran deal, they were supposed to bring it to Congress and get it ratified by Congress, and it was not ratified. And that gave the new president at the time, President Trump, the power to rescind
the legal leverage.
The legal leverage to walk it back, which is exactly what he did. And again, in his spirit, he thought he was making a bargaining move. He thought by pulling out, Iran would come to the table and try to negotiate something else. And that's not what happened. So again, the election of Joe Biden brings back the experience that most people understand him to have in negotiating these international deals, and he knows you cannot just pull out of the deal and expect that the other person will walk in. Maybe that may not happen, so you have to walk.
Did you have the impression that something has been lacking legally for the past 4 years that America missed, that would have taken the world maybe forward legally? Do you think that something was lacking in this continuous rollback?
I wouldn't go that far. The U.S. presidency and the U.S. system has the particularity of awarding everything to the winner. So when you win the presidency, you have the opportunity, you have the privilege to come in and implement what you believe is right. And I strongly believe President Trump, took a number of actions that he believed were right. I don't think there was a legal miss necessarily. I don't think there was a vacuum necessarily. It was just a repositioning of priorities. It was a repositioning of methods, and it was a repositioning of angles of negotiation. And again, some of it didn't go anywhere, and some people who are experienced in these matters understood very early on that that would not go far. And I believe the president himself is realizing that those were not very smart moves, because in the end, the U.S. found itself isolated. We couldn't call Germany, the U.S. couldn't call Germany, couldn't call France to go into some action. Canada, the closest neighbor, Mexico. So it led to some kind of isolation, and that's what was the unfortunate part about it.
A while ago, we talked about the New York Bar Association, and that is where the legal territory of your law firm is found, Guide Laureate, which the New York Bar Association is about 74,000 members. Out of that number, roughly 18,000 of them reside out of the state of New York. When you sit in your office in New York, around the Manhattan area, you look at the skyscrapers, the UN headquarters, what do you think is the greatest legal challenge facing the world today, which the Biden-Harris administration must urgently tackle?
And I will say without hesitation, and maybe because of the proximity with the UN, that it worries me a little that we don't have a strong UN anymore. It worries me a little bit to know that the United States has not been a big backer of the UN in the past few years. So for me, one of the biggest challenges that I can see, sitting again in Manhattan where I sit, is not having a strong UN leading to a number of problems around the world. I still believe the US has to support the UN, not just the US. Major countries have to continue to support the UN. The UN has to be strong. The reality is the UN is not strong. The UN is not flexible. The US has grown, the United Nations have grown so big, so inflexible, so ceremonious, to the point where today it is difficult to understand the role of the UN and the efficacy of the UN in the complex problems that the UN has to solve. So when I look around, sitting where I sit, I'm still pleading for a strong UN, because the mission of the UN is large, it's big, it's important, and the UN has to continue to show its flexibility in the approach.
Your legal area of operation is mostly in commercial issues, treaties, fiscal policy.
Absolutely.
When you talk of making or giving the UN more support, what kind of support are you talking about?
I wasn't necessarily confining my comment to my professional area of expertise. I was speaking more politically for countries, on the one hand, to support politically the UN, and on the other hand, to financially support the UN. Because the UN, again, is a big institution that was meant to help solve problems and avoid a third world war. And the UN has been weakening itself, quite frankly, but also has been weakened by the lack of support by governments around the world. So I was speaking more broadly from a political perspective. Now, if I go back to my specific area of expertise, whether it is international tax policy, international law, I have to say the globalization is something that can be a double-edged sword. Globalization can be dangerous for countries like Cameroon in terms of trying to face big multinational companies. And again, for full disclosure, I only represent big multinational companies. So I know exactly what happens. And then when we come to the developing world, it is difficult for countries, governments, to understand how to manage, how to tax some of these multinational companies. So it becomes a very
in other words,
challenging.
You are saying that in the developing countries where Cameroon is found, Nigeria, South Sudan, South Africa, to an extent Brazil, to an extent Russia somehow, or China, depending on the kind of classification you want to use, the rules of the World Trade Organization, for example, can be somehow tricky for those countries to follow them.
They can be very tricky, not only because those countries don't necessarily and don't always have the expertise to understand and manage these rules, but also because when those rules are made, there's very little input from these countries. And I spent some of my time, quite frankly, some of my spare time, traveling in the developing world. For example, we are in Cameroon right now, which is Africa. I've spent some time in Africa while partnering with the African Union to work with African governments in shoring up their fiscal policies, specifically their international tax policies. I've spent time in Kenya, spent time in Rwanda, South Africa, Botswana, working with governments to help them make sure they shore up their tax policy. Because rules coming from the WTO and other international organizations, mostly really on the fiscal policy side, the OECD, can be very complex.
According to The Economist, one of the greatest research-based news outlets in the world, the New York offices of American law firms generate roughly $2 billion on international disputes-related matters. Two-thirds of the litigants are in English commercial law, which is, of course, your alma mater, especially foreign ones, where you people somehow defranchised for the past 4 years. When you hear that the U.S. government is pulling away from trade deals like the Trans-Pacific Partnership or the Transatlantic Trade Agreement?
The short answer is no. There is never. There will.
Your businesses kept on going on.
Very well. Very well. I believe there will usually be very few things that will put lawyers out of business, because whatever is going on in a society like America, you need lawyers to go through it. The fact pulling out of NAFTA and then coming out with USMCA, which basically is NAFTA 2.0.
You mean the North American Treaty Organization?
Exactly.
The US, Canada, and Mexico.
And Mexico.
Which was reworked.
Reworked. Okay. Which is NAFTA 2.0.
Okay.
So all these movements, quite frankly, do not affect our professional life as much, especially in the business world. What is interesting is to see how it affects our clients. What our clients do and where they go.
Did it affect your clients somehow?
Absolutely, absolutely.
How?
When the president pulls out of NAFTA or makes a speech about getting out of NAFTA, it makes our multinationals nervous. You have multinational with huge investments in Mexico. You have multinational with huge investments in Canada.
General Electric, Apple.
Exactly, and those investments, most of them
Tesla.
Most of them were dictated by
General
the
Motors.
NAFTA. Exactly. Yeah. So when you announce that you're pulling out, a lot of our clients are nervous and a little bit self-serving, but they start calling us. It makes our business go up. And then when you come in and you replace it with a USMCA, of course, we know fundamentally it's the same framework, and they go back to business as usual.
Well, the question I will ask about that, because you said that very few elements take lawyers out of their business because the clients are always there. You practice from the US hit today terribly, is the worst affected country in the world by the coronavirus. Just how much of a damage has the pandemic been to the legal world?
The damage has been huge. I'm going to use the word, a word that is famous with our current president. It's huge damage. It's affected us a lot. Not just the legal world, strictly speaking, but our clients. When you have General Motors has to shut down its plants, they have to lay off, or they have to put some of their employees at home, it affects us. Because we need our clients functioning for us to continue to accompany them and assist them. So I haven't seen official statistics yet, but the legal world, including specifically the New York area, has been very affected by the COVID-19. Most firms, though, have done quite well transitioning to virtual workspaces.
I will just head into the virtual experience. The normal courtroom that you and I know is the magistrate there, the judge there, the lawyer here, the defendant over there, everybody in the same courtroom. And when you sit in New York and they tell you that it is completely locked down because Governor Andrew Cuomo has given instructions, because the mayor of New York, Bill Blasio, they have given all these instructions. How do you feel when you are going to school and to know that you must always operate in the courtroom, and now you sit in your room alone and you are giving legal assistance to your client? How does that world operate?
It is a different world. It is a different world, but an exciting world. And I have to say, the legal profession embraced the world in a way that was very impressive. It is good to be doing that in the US because there's technology, the kinds of technology you cannot even imagine. In fact, it is as if courtroom never stopped. Everything went virtual, where you can come in, make your oral argument virtually, and everything was working almost perfectly. The transition was quite amazing.
You experienced quarantine in some form, right?
I did.
Okay.
I live in Manhattan, and then we were locked down for a good period of 4 weeks, where you were not allowed to go. I own a dog, so I would take my dog for a walk in the morning, but that was about it. You were supposed to stay home. You're not supposed to go out. You're not supposed to interact with anyone. We had that for a good period of about 4 weeks. It was difficult, it was different, but at the same time, when you saw what was happening, and New York was very hard hit at the time, I'm speaking about March, April, you had refrigerated trucks because there were so many people dying and they didn't have anywhere to keep them. So you knew exactly how
Plus 300,000 dead now.
Exactly. And not a joke at all. And it's hitting really, really hard. I'm very thankful that is not the case here in Cameroon, but I can only imagine if it were to become the case, what kind of shape we'll be in.
A while ago, you said that globalization can be very dangerous. From the way you speak, I understand you are part of the liberal American point of view. What Trump...
That's a little bit of a dangerous characterization. Because if my American friends are listening to me and then they hear the characterization of me as a liberal, I think they will be a little bit surprised. But
okay. Anyway, what Trump calls the radical left, people fall short of the glory of George Canning's expression. George Canning used to be the British Prime Minister during the Congress system in Europe after the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and he stated, quote, to show this dislike of Europeanization what Boris Johnson incarnates today, Brexit. This is what he said, quote, every nation for itself, God for us all. This is what globalists fail to understand. Joe Biden is part of the globalist agenda, engagement, interventionism, working with other partners around the world. Concretely, what is the impact of Joe Biden's election to the international legal order?
Joe Biden is a globalist. President Trump is a globalist. He may not admit it. But what I'm trying to say is, today, you almost have no choice but to be a globalist. You almost have no choice but to understand that the world is a big living room. You cannot hide behind a couch. You'll be wasting your time because everybody will see you. Technology has transformed us into a global space where we cannot really say that we'll stand on our own. And some people will try to deny and say globalism maybe is bad. I mean, the argument whether it's bad is good is a different argument. But the argument whether we have it, for me, is a useless argument because we have it and globalization is here to stay. Now, how do you approach globalization? How do you get into globalization? You can always continue to try to deny it.
You as a lawyer, as an attorney, like the consecrated word is used in the US, when you hear that an American president says publicly that if members of the International Criminal Court, for example, step their leg in the US, they will be arrested, they will not be given visas and all other things. Did you have the impression, or do you have the impression that the US has turned a blind eye to justice around the world?
No, I wouldn't go that far. Again, people will always make statements. I strongly believe the US is a big supporter of international justice. And again, I mean, back in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, I wrote a paper about a decision the Supreme Court has just published at the time, talking about an Australian who was coming into the US to try to sue for some things that happened in Australia. And the US Supreme Court at the time said the Australian had no standing and they couldn't come to the US and sue because of things that happened in Australia. And that was extremely criticized. And I wrote a paper about that to say that is actually not what the US is about, and that's what the US jurisprudence has been. The reality is the US is a big supporter of justice around the world, And having Joe Biden a globalist, or I will continue to say that Trump a globalist, is only in fulfilling the idea of the United States as a power that tried to broker peace and justice around the world. And as a lawyer, I continue to believe, and I know a lot of my colleagues who sacrifice of themselves, of their time, of their money to travel around the world and try to raise the profile and try to end some injustices. And I believe the US continues to be in that philosophy, and that cannot be changed by a statement made by someone.
End this interview with some personal thoughts about you. The United States of America is roughly 249 years old as a country with roughly 332 million people. There are 94 district courts in the United States of America, 13 circuit courts, and 1 Supreme Court. You left Cameroon about 11 years ago, a graduate of the Cameroonian school system, right up to the master's level at the University of Douala. Last year, the American Bar Association recognized you as one amongst the 40 under the age of 40 rising lawyers in the whole of the United States of America. When you look yourself critically, you conclude that you are a legal reality of the famous American dream.
And that is true. I'll grant you that point. I believe we used to hear about the American dream, and some of us thought it was something that was talked about and discussed. But the truth is, it is really something that exists. And I was trained in Cameroon. I went to school in Cameroon. I went to the University of Douala. I finished here in 2008, and then 2009, I go to the US. And unfortunately, but I had to start my studies again because I wanted to be a lawyer in the US, and my training in Cameroon would not fit that. So I had to restart, and I had my law degree. I had my doctorate in law.
At Michigan?
University of Michigan, exactly, which is, by the way, the #1 public university in the entire United States.
Oh, sure.
So, and then I go sit for the New York Bar. I passed the New York Bar in 2011, and I started practicing. And in a span of 8 years, it was really a highlight last year in 2020 when the 40 under 40, like they call it, the 40 under 40 ranking came out by the American Bar Association. And I should mention that the American Bar Association has a ranking on 40 under 40, and then you have the National Bar Association, which is another organization of lawyers across the US, call it the NBA, National Bar Association. They also have their ranking of the 40 under 40. And interestingly, extraordinarily,
on all the aggregates.
All the aggregate, I was ranked in both in 2020.
You should be 26 or something of that nature?
26, yeah.
Okay.
It is more of an alphabetical because they don't rank within the 40, they just give the top 40.
Okay.
So was a big highlight last year because, again, the US is more than 2 million lawyers, and over 1 million of them are under the age of 40. And you do not apply to be ranked. In fact, you get nominated by people who know you, people who know your work, people who know the kinds of successes you have had in the courtroom. They nominate you. And I was impressed, I was humbled, really, to know that I was nominated by so many colleagues who knew me as a lawyer. And then to have that honor was just something extraordinary in 2020. But then the other highlight came in a couple of weeks later. After the ranking was announced, then they go in and there's something that will be, kept forever in the US, and then they do the background search on the people who have been ranked. And that's when I get the call from the American Bar Association, and they're telling me that, in fact, they're realizing that for the 200 plus years of the American Bar Association, I'm the first Cameroonian of origin to be part of this ranking, and only one of the very rare African of origin. So it was a big honor.
U.S. Attorney Zachee Pouga Tinaga, thank you very much indeed for being guest on GlobeWatch.
Thank you very much, Charles, for having me, and Happy New Year to everyone.
And same to you.